Nice people.
We stopped at that moment in which he is wet in his room. And we said how he sees her as a kind of synonym for water divinity. Which, as I tried to hint at last week, is draws attention to the problem of perception that Jude has. Problem of perception, especially where Sue is concerned, in that she seems, first of all, she's part of an idealized, romantic idea that he has of her. But the more he knows her, the more developed, or the more their relation develops, the more her idealization is reinforced, becomes stronger. Instead of lessening, it becomes even stronger. And I tried to explain last time that the simple reason for that is that as Jude is progressing, in a sense, he begins with a number of ideals or dreams. And as he moves on, as he develops, he sheds one ideal after the other. It's like he gets rid of those ideals. In a sense, his story, his development, is a development that leads towards complete, or at least a deep sense of disillusionment. I want you to keep that in mind. With Jude, what you will see, and that's what makes him a modern individual. This disillusionment is what it is. I mean, of course it does. It may be translated as a sense of dissatisfaction, that he is unhappy with the situation, and that's what it is. But it's also, disillusionment has to be understood as having lived, before that, having lived in illusion.
Yes.
And his life is really a series of illusions. Those illusions are based on his romanticizing everything that he adopts. The reference to Sue as a pagan divinity, or a synonym for a water divinity, I said, reinforces that sense of idealization, because when he loses his belief in what Christ minister represents, Sue becomes a substitute. Every loss is replaced by more idealization of Sue. And that's why Sue becomes even too much for what she can be as an individual. In other words, he makes her into something that she cannot be. After all, she's only human. And that's very important. We have to keep that in mind. She's just a human. But he idealizes her to an extent that he sees in her more than she sees in herself. Remember that Sue is a very nervous kind of character. Nervous in the real sense of the English term nervous. Because she doesn't know exactly where she stands. She seems to be torn between at least two different traditions or frames of reference. Yes, traditions or frames of reference. One, which is classical, Greek, or Greco-Roman, and the other one, which is biblical or Judeo-Christian in terms of the reference to the culture, to the civilization. The fact that she's torn between those two makes her somebody who does not know exactly how to behave and how to act. And many of her acts or decisions are really reactions. They're not really actions, they are reactions. Not very clear, huh? The look on your face. I'll explain. They are reactions because they don't seem, we know, as a character, Sue is, at least, she sees herself as a free woman. And therefore, yeah, she would like to, and she does her best in order to really act according to her own will and to her own free decision. But the reality is that she takes decisions based on what happens to her. Let me explain. How does she marry Philipson? I mean, a free woman would not choose to marry Philipson. He seems to have, or she seems to have given him a promise that she did not even think of. Later on, she's going to blame him for that. When she asks for to go back to Jude, or to go to Jude, she will tell him that, in a sense, he forced her into giving him a promise. And having given her promise, she found herself tied by that promise. And therefore she accepts, or at least she finds herself trapped in the promise. When she discovers that Jude is married, and therefore she can never have him, she immediately decides, we're marrying in 4 weeks. And she comes to live close to Jude, where he's going to give her away as the closest possible relative. And later she's going to tell him that. So she's not completely free. We have to remember that she's always torn, and therefore part of her decisions come from a psychology that is not stable. Okay, that is not very balanced. And that's what makes her nervous. Her nervousness it reflects her inability to stand on firm grounds. The ground on which she stands is not firm. She's not well anchored in any specific belief. Okay? And that's why, torn between her rationality, I think she's keeping you your place. You have kept it for her, huh? She's torn between her rationality, because she likes to think of herself as a reasonable, rational individual, but at the same time, she is torn between the person who is nervous and therefore reacts emotionally to situations that she does not control. Sometimes simply out of a whim, and she becomes impulsive. And this is why at the end, whereas Jude's progress towards disillusionment is gradual, and even to a large extent, logical. It makes some sense. You see how he's moved from an idealization of Christ minister and his own dreams and the desire to be a bishop. That romantic dream is shattered first because Christ minister does not seem to be made for people like him. And he realizes that. So the sense of failure is in many ways, or consonant with the sense of frustration. What does he do? He moves to the next best thing. That's Jude. Jude seems to move from an extreme idealization and romanticization of his dreams and of his life and the people around him to a more realistic vision of his individuality. He is much more realistic near the end. Of course, he cannot get rid of the feelings he has for Sue, his love for her, but at least his sense of who he wants to be, what he can achieve as somebody from a poor background, he is at least much more realistic about that. And that's why he moves from Christ minister, from the dream of becoming a bishop, to simply being a licentiate. And that dream of becoming a licentiate, we will see in Shastan, it's going to be destroyed completely. How is that going to be destroyed? And that's why I said his development, his disillusionment is related to his sense of individuation. We are in a story about growing up. not necessarily, of course it does begin with Jude as a child, and therefore it's really a it is in the Bildungsroman tradition. For those of you who have never heard of that, some of you, I think, would have done it in one of our classes. Bildungsroman in German. It's a novel about development. Don't be scared by the words. The word is simple. Bildung, building, in English. It's the same word. Okay? Roman is roman in French, novel. So, Bildungsroman, but the term is technical. When we use it in English, we know what we're talking about. We know we're talking about a specific kind of novel. It's a novel about characters who develop. They may start off as children and then they're adults somewhere or even die and become old at the end. But mostly about characters who are round characters. In the sense that they develop a consciousness and they become, at least they learn about life and about themselves and about the world. And Jude the Obscure is that kind of novel. And Jude really develops in that sense. He grows up intellectually. And in that sense, his sense of his individuation is Carl Jung's term for really growing up, for acquiring your own identity. Individual comes from that. Again, don't be scared of the words. Some of the words look big and and strong and scary, but they are very simple words. This is about how we, as individuals, develop an identity that is ours, different from that of others. I'm not going to go into the details of how different Carl Jung's view of it is from Freud's, for example. That's not what is important here.
But Jude develops in the negative sense, because at the end it becomes, as opposed to Sue, who becomes religious, he becomes skeptical. So he develops in the negative sense.
Well, that's what I was trying to say. But his development is logical. Because he moves from extreme idealization of Christ minister, of his own quest, and then he moves from Christ minister to something less, and from bishop to something less, licentiate. Later in Shastan, and we will see how, remember we said it is a novel about moving from one place to another. And the places are metaphorical, they are symbolic. The cities, or the places they move to, or from and to, are metaphorical because they represent something. We will see, for example, how Shastan is really the right place for him to lose his religious belief. And we will see how. But remember, Sue is granted by Philippson, he grants her desire to go and live with Jude. So she leaves. But it doesn't happen immediately. The turning point, and we will come to that, the turning point is a special kiss that they share, that they have, if you remember. Immediately after that, what does Jude do? He burns his books. He burns his books. And even the narrator tells us it's a turning point. Why does he burn his books? Because Jude, unlike Sue, he is always, at least he believes that he knows where he is, or where he wants to be. So the moment he kisses her and realizes that his passion for her is stronger than everything else, he realizes that he's unfit for a religious career. That he's not suitable for a career in religion. And therefore he burns the books. He does not want to live in contradiction. You may say that what makes him special, it is his complete belief or the strong passion that he has for Sue. He can probably decide about everything else except for Sue. In the case of Sue, he only does what she wants. What will make her comfortable, what will make her happy, that's the thing he's going to. That's why he does not choose to marry her. He accepts to live with her without marrying her. He accepts her view of it. Okay? And when she leaves, he is shattered. He does not understand. And he even tells her more than once. She is the one responsible for his disillusionment. If he loses faith, if he loses belief, it's because she is the Voltairean. It's not he. He is not the Voltairean. Okay, so I want you to keep this in mind. As we're working through that, when he calls her a sea nymph for a water divinity, he is really still confused and confusing Sue for what she is not. He is making her embody two different aspects of what he is, of what determines his own quest. What are those aspects? Hardy is clear about that. The novel is about that. The struggle between the flesh and the spirit. The struggle between the material and the spiritual. Whether that spiritual is religious, purely religious and moral, or if it's something else. Doesn't matter. At least it is a spiritual quest. As opposed to what Arabella stands for, and of course what he craves for, what he desires also from Sue. So that's not necessarily what Sue is like, or what's a divinity, but it is how Jude sees her. So the problem is a problem of perception on the part of Jude rather than Sue herself. Of course she's in many ways like that, but it is his perception that is very subjective and therefore makes her into something she is not. Okay? I'll take you to that moment in which they talk about when he learns about her relationship with that young man. So having, I don't know. Yes, chapter 4. The beginning of the chapter, I think somewhere down the page,
Jude, wait.
you called me a creature of civilization. Can you find that? In the dialogue. Or can you find the paragraph? When she had sat upright, she breathed plaintively. Can you find that? Okay, the pages. 142? 143. You normally have the pages, and I was expecting you, when I sent that document, I was expecting you to, to highlight, to go to the passages. So, yeah, I know some of you did, but only some of you. You did. Yes. Really? Do you imagine them putting the whole novel?
At least they kept the parts of the big slaughter.
Oh, the pig, yeah, the slaughtering of the pig.
Sequence where she shows about the fact that they move a lot to the city, except the fact that they're living. That one marriage, he told her in the sentence that we will keep moving every time as long as we take the world to change.
And that's exactly, yeah, these are the things that they didn't change. I don't know about the movie, I don't know whether it's really good. I know with Kate Winslet it must be a good movie.
Yes.
I mean, at least explains to right.
I saw it, but
does it really
reading
follow
the
the
novel
novel?
is better.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Although it's
Are you sure? I'm gonna have to watch it.
No, it's all at the... I don't mean don't watch it, but they had...
I know.
No, I mean that they didn't took the story, the
They didn't take
storyline
as it is.
They had took some pieces, they modified, they omit some sequences, they...
Yeah, it's good to watch movies based on novels. But I wanted to be careful because until probably the 60s, even the early 70s, most of the movies based on novels or on literary texts did their best to respect the original. The late 70s and the early 80s, things changed completely. And if you watch Shakespeare today in movies, it's not Shakespeare that you read. So watch out, because there is a lot of anachronism in those modern movies, in these contemporary movies. They like to reread those texts in the way we would see them today. Okay? And they try to assume that the writers probably had things in mind that they couldn't say, and so they're saying it in their place. And many novelists are not very happy at least those who are alive, with their novels when they are produced in movies. I talked about Milan Kundera, I talked about The Unbearable Lightness of Being, famous movie, great movie. Milan Kundera did not like the movie because he said it's not my novel. Okay? But the movie was a big success. But he did not like it because it did not reflect how he saw, at least his own novel. But anyways, I'll keep that in mind. I'll take a look, but watch out. They generally never completely respect the movies, except if it's the novels.
Not from
Except
quotations.
no, I mean, you will find the quotations, you will find the storyline, but I'm not sure you will find the characters represented in the way that, for example, Thomas Hardy wants them to be represented. So I'm not sure about that. Anyways, you called me, she's talking to him, you called me a creature of civilization or something, didn't you? She said, breaking a silence. It was very odd, you should have done that, she says. Why? Well, because it is provokingly wrong. I am a sort of negation of it. And here we're, in these kinds of dialogues, keep two things in mind. Of course, dialogues are very revealing. And remember, I did talk earlier about this notion. I'm sorry. About polyphony, or the polyphonic novel. I would explain at least one of the ways in which you can see that. Every time you have these dialogues between characters, especially for example, in Jude the Obscure, that's really the case. When Bakhtin was talking about the polyphonic novel, he was talking about Dostoevsky, but I think in many ways he was talking about, he could have talked about Hardy, at least in Jude the Obscure. And also in Tess, I think, to a large extent. What you see here, you have poly, meaning many, and phonic, voices. Said that one of the ways in which we can understand polyphony is the fact that the novel refers directly or indirectly to a number of texts that are outside. But they are quoted, either quoted inside the novel, like the book of Job from the Bible, the Song of Solomon, as we're going to see probably later, and other texts. Or from poems, from Browning, from Swinburne, lots of other poets. Milton also. All of these references tell us that in the novel, there is a form of intertextuality. Remember this word also?
Yes.
Intertextuality that explains the novel. But polyphony, as used by Bakhtin in the case of Dostoevsky, also means something else. We have an omniscient third-person narrator, which means that it is a narrator who knows everything. Okay? So he could, if he wanted to say everything, to tell us everything we need to know about the characters and about their thoughts and about their emotions. But in many ways, he doesn't do that. He does with a lot of irony in many cases, especially in the case of Jude, and a casual, casual between quotation marks, statement here and there. But on the whole, what we have, whether we're talking about Jude and Sue, Jude and Arabella, Sue and Phillotson, Phillotson and Gillingham, his friend. Remember his friend Gillingham? Every time we have a conversation between any of those two, what we really have are strong-minded characters. Characters with beliefs, with opinions. And the polyphonic novel is a novel in which the characters are given freedom to express their ideas. In fact, what we have is a confrontation of the different ideas of the characters. Okay? And this is why it's polyphony, because it's many voices, and they are just as good, they are just as strong as the voice of the author, of the narrator. In other words, you cannot dismiss Jude or Sue simply because they live in contradiction, simply because they contradict themselves. No. In spite of the contradictions, they are characters with strong opinions, and those opinions count. Sue's opinions count because she is a free woman. She is a new species, a new breed of women that is just beginning. Okay? And when she talks or discusses, or she has a conversation with Jude, really it's not just a conversation about, it is a confrontation of different views of the world, of different ideas, of different opinions. That's what I want you to keep in mind. Okay? And that's why I insist on some of those conversations. We will see We will see with, especially with Gillingham, Phillotson and Gillingham, because their conversation will really be a mirror of what it means to be somebody like Phillotson with new ideas, much more realistic, somebody who's much more realistic about what women are like, that they have their own identities, their own personalities, and therefore can choose what they want to be, and somebody who is so conservative, so traditional, and so male in his views that he will contradict and he will argue strongly, and he will not even understand how Phillotson thinks. And he will, referring to Phillotson and to Jude, remember at one point Phillotson tells him, I don't know if you remember the process, but Phillotson decides against all odds, against the world, to let Sue go. And he faces the community, the school, the staff, the administration, and the community as a whole. He tries to tell them, no, I mean, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to ask her to come back. I'm not going to, I think I have no right. And we will see what his argument is. He lets her go. And he faces the whole community. And they ask him to resign, and he refuses to resign, if you remember. But because he refuses to resign, they dismiss him. And we have, tragedy, and this is what in Hardy, this is tragedy. And this is always what tragedy is about. It's the individual versus society. It's the individual as opposed to the forces of society. He's dismissed from school. He's given the sack. What does he do? He goes to another place, looking for a job. In other words, he engages in a form of self-sacrifice for the sake of his ideas and for his opinions. That's when he meets Gillingham. After the dismissal, he falls sick. Gillingham comes, because now that he knows it's been dismissed, and he pays him regular visits, which is very interesting. He pays him regular visits because he now realizes that he needs, probably his friends needs him. But it is really, Thomas Hardy's way of making us or bringing us into direct confrontation with the opposition of ideas. It's when he comes to visit him that they discuss. And when they discuss, we see how different their views are. He falls sick. Gillingham comes, sees him, and says, does she know? Says, I don't want her to know. When I sent her away, I told her, I don't want to know anything about you and about Jude. He doesn't want to hear anything about them anymore. What does Gillingham do? He goes back home. He writes a letter to Sue. He writes a letter to Sue telling her that Phillotson, Richard, is sick. So she pays him a visit. Remember, this is a very, very strong emotional moment because he says, I'm ready, I forgive you, just come back. But she refuses to come back. She says, no, I'm not coming back. It's just that I heard that you were very sick, but now I see that you're better, so I'm leaving. During that moment, very emotional moment, something slips into the conversation. What is it? That Jude and Arabella are being divorced. That Jude is going to grant Arabella divorce. Well, yeah, he didn't know, but at least he accepts to grant her divorce. And Phillotson, immediately after that, tells Gillingham, I'm going to give her divorce. How can you do that? He says, her lover, Jude, is divorcing his wife because she too has a relationship with somebody else. He doesn't know she's married to somebody else. What does Gillingham say? Something like, you're a weird lot. You're strange, you're bizarre. And he really represents dogma and represents the conservative views of a society that is not ready for change. And that's why to him, that's the nicest comment he makes. You're a bizarre lot, or you're strange individuals. But remember that when he lets her go, when he tells him, I'm going to let her go, on his own he says something that Phillotson does not hear. Before that, if I had been you, I would really force her to come back. And what does that mean? And Thomas Hardy is clear. The narrator tells us that. Society expects that. The law imposes that. He has the right to make her live with him in spite of herself, and she has to consent to having sexual intercourse with him. It's not considered rape as it is today. Because she's simply under his power and under his dominance, and she is subordinate to him by virtue of the law of marriage. Okay? And that's what he tells him. If I had been you, I would bring her back by force and would make her submit to my will. Phillotson does not do that. You called me a creature of civilization. It was very odd you should have done that. Why? Well, because it is provokingly wrong. I'm a sort of negation of it. And Jude says, you are very philosophical. And that's again a sign that the novel is a novel of ideas. It's a topical novel. It is about ideas. It's about the themes that were of importance to the society of the time. And negation is profound talking. Is it? Do I strike you as being learned or learned, if you write it in? If you read in Old English. Learned, probably that's how they read it. She asked, with a touch of raillery. No, not learned. Only you don't talk quite like a girl. Only you don't talk quite like a girl. Because girls do not talk like that. His idea of girls. And in fact, yes, she is really a different kind of girl from what he knows of what society, what culture breeds, or what kind of girls society produces. Well, a girl who has had no advantages. Because he sees her like him. Somebody who, because of their background, they do not have. I have had advantages. I don't know Latin and Greek, though I know the grammars of those tongues. But I know most of the Greek and Latin classics through translations, and other books too. I read Lempriere, Catullus, and all of these are names that normally you wouldn't expect girls to read. These are all free thinkers. Okay? All of them. And that's why he will call her, you're a Voltairian. You're a Voltairian. Catullus, Martial, Juvenal, Lucian, all of them Greek and others, and Roman also, Juvenal. Lucian, Beaumont and Fletcher, Renaissance playwrights. Boccaccio, Italian Renaissance, became very important. Of course, the Renaissance in Italy, not in England. Boccaccio, he wrote the Decameron. And you know what the Decameron is? No? We didn't talk about it in Trends? No? I'm sure we have. The Decameron is something like Alf Layla or Layla, but it's different. There's a plague in Italy. There's a plague. And a group of young men and women, not married, decide to flee the plague. And how do they flee the plague? They go and live in the country, away from the city, where the plague is. Because around them people are dying by the dozens. So they decide to go, and they go to that place. They live in a big house together, and as the title says, Decameron, meaning Deca, meaning 10. And you're going to have 10 days of storytelling. They decide as a group, every day they will have a king or a queen. And the king and the queen decides on the theme of the stories to be told, and one of them tells the story. So they take turns telling stories. The stories they tell one another are, very full of, sexual implications, and, and very explicit in many cases. And this is what she's reading. Okay? Boccaccio, Scarron, De Brantôme, Sterne, Defoe, Smollett, Fielding, Shakespeare, many of them you do know, the Bible, and other such. So she has read a lot. This is really the classic, the curriculum of the humanities. That's what she would read if she had been in Christminster, in college. And found that all interest in the unwholesome part of those books ended with its mystery. You have read more than I, he said with a sigh. How came you to read some of those queer ones? And queer ones. We don't know which he's referring to, but I'm sure he has Boccaccio in mind and all those free thinkers. Well, she said thoughtfully, it was by accident. My life has been entirely shaped by what people call a peculiarity in me. And Thomas Hardy says, when you have a mixture of the personal biography, of the psychological and the social, you have all the ingredients for a life that can be very tragic. Okay? So in fact what he is saying is, some things in me have predestined me for what I am, for who I am. I haven't chosen that. That's genetic, determinism. The peculiarity in me. I have no fear of men. Which means that I haven't acquired that from culture. I have no fear of men as such, nor of their books. I have mixed with them, one or two of them particularly, almost as one of their own sex. I mean, I have not felt about them as most women are taught to feel. Are taught
to feel. Society.
Of course. I mean, it's very hard to find a statement like that in a 19th century traditional novel about the fact that what determines gender is culture, not just biology. Taught to feel, to be on their guard against attacks on their virtue. On their virtue. For no average man, no man, short of a sensual savage, and she has a high idea of men, sensual savage will molest a woman by day or night, at home or abroad, unless she invites him. We're not going to go into the debate about that, because it's going to be a long debate, okay? Of course, there are lots of misconceptions there as well, that she seems to have inherited, or at least learned from society itself. Until she says, by look, come on, he is always afraid to. And if you never say it, or look it, he never comes. We don't know about that, huh? At least experience does not reflect that necessarily. However, what I was going to say is that when I was 18, I formed a friendly intimacy with an undergraduate at Christminster. And he taught me a great deal and lent me books which I should never have got hold of otherwise. Two birds with one stone, that's what Thomas Hardy always does. That the kind of young woman Sue is, the kind of background she belongs to, does not prepare her, at least does not offer her the possibility to study in college, but she can study. This is why she's smart, this is why she's intelligent, because having acquired the books, she has educated herself also. Is your friendship broken off? Oh yes, he died, poor fellow, 2 or 3 years after he had taken his degree and left Christminster. And this is very weird, the way she speaks about this young man. She seems to have a sense, a light sense of guilt, but at the same time that she doesn't want to, she doesn't want to feel guilty. She doesn't want to at least assume that she's partly responsible for that, as if she's incapable of doing that. We don't know whether Hardy is trying to tell us that the intellectual part in her is stronger than the emotional, but I don't know. Probably that, but that she does not have the kind of personality that feels strongly emotionally, the way Jude, for example, feels, and that's why she does not. She is happy being with him. She doesn't want to go into any further development of that relationship until she is forced. Oh yes, he died, poor fellow. You saw a good deal of him, I suppose. Yes. We used to go by, this is how we learn what kind of person Sue is. I mean, this is the 19th century. The novel was published in the late 80s. Well, that's the latest, yes, edition. Yeah, but probably written before that. And we're talking about the late 80s and the early 90s. And this is a woman who has lived with a young man in the same apartment or flat or room without anything happening between the two. We used to go about together on walking tours, reading tours, and things like that, of that sort. Like two men, almost. He asked me to live with him, and I agreed to by letter. But when I joined him in London, I found he meant a different thing from what I meant. And who's the weird one here? I mean, it's definitely Sue, who is not. Well, she said, come live with me. I mean, she must have sensed what kinds of feelings he had for her. He wanted me to be his mistress, in fact, but I wasn't in love with him. I wasn't in love with him. And on my saying, I mean, this is really the opposite of Arabella. Arabella does not want to be in love, does not care about being in love. But living with a person, with a man, is really a necessity for her. And we realize that she can do it even outside the bond of marriage. We shared a sitting room for 15 months, and he became a leader right of one of the great London dailies, till he was taken ill and had to go abroad. He said I was breaking his heart by holding out against him so long as at such close quarters. I mean, living so close together and yet not having any, being just like that, friends. He could never have believed it of woman. Not of a woman, of woman. Of the female species. He did not think women capable, this is a generalization, of, pure intellectual empathy without necessarily being interested in physical closeness. Of course, because he too is part of a society that believes in women as fallen creatures because of the biblical view. I might play that game once too often, he said. He came home merely to die. His death caused a terrible remorse in me for my cruelty, though I hope he died of consumption and not of me entirely. I went down to Sandbourne to his funeral and was his only mourning. He left me a little money because I broke his heart, I suppose. That's how men are. So much better than women. And we don't know whether that is true. I mean, of course, it cannot be true. Yes?
Does consumption here mean tuberculosis?
Yes, consumption is what we call today tuberculosis. It is a disease, at least that's the word that they have for it, that makes an individual lose a lot of weight until they die. Good heavens, what did you do then? Now you're angry with me, she said. A contralto note. And this is not the only time Sue's voice is described in musical terms. Whether it's a contralto or a vibrato or, there's always this kind of, there's a tremor in her voice. And we don't know whether it's part of her musicality. And we know that she plays the piano better than Jude. At least when he becomes interested in music. Maybe because of that nervousness, that hesitation in her voice or in her personality. Contralto note of tragedy coming suddenly into her silvery voice. I wouldn't have told you if I had known. No, I'm not. Tell me all. Well, I invested his money, poor fellow, in a bubble scheme and lost it. I lived about London by myself for some time, and then I returned to Christminster as my father, who was also in London and had started as an art metalworker near Long Acre, wouldn't have me back. And I got that occupation in the artist shop where you found me. I said you didn't know how bad I was. And what she means is, I mean, women like me are not commonplace. You don't find them everywhere, okay? And that means how bad I am in the eyes of society. Her father doesn't want her, she lives on her own, she has lived with a man for 15 months, sharing one space with him. Jude looked round upon the armchair and its occupant, Sue, as if to read more carefully the creature he had given shelter. He wants to understand, to read meaning to interpret. His voice trembled as he said, however you have lived, Sue, I believe you are as innocent as you are unconventional. And that's what strikes him in her. And that's what he likes about her. She is unconventional. She's everything that culture, society, tradition, she's everything that does not expect, or do not expect. I'm not particularly innocent, as you see, now that I have. And she quotes, again another intertext, twitch the robe from that blank lay figure you fancy draped. I'm not the figure you have in your imagination. I have removed that. I mean, she's trying to show him that beyond his idealization, she is really a human. She is a woman. But he does not seem to, said she, with an ostensible sneer, though he could hear that she was brimming with tears. She's trying to feel, or at least to be, light-hearted, almost nonchalant, careless. But there are tears in her eyes. In her voice, he senses that she's stifled, she's about to cry. So there's this mixture of the emotional and the intellectual, the tragic and the less tragic, or the comic, at least the way she wants to at least what she says, through her sneer. But I have never yielded myself to any lover, if that's what you mean. I have remained as I began. I quite believe you, but some women would not have remained as they began. Why is he telling her? Because that's what happened with Arabella. Arabella didn't want to stay as she began. She wanted to change that in order to trap her. Perhaps not. Better women would not. People say, I must be cold-natured. This is not just people. This is really probably the problem with her. Because we can understand that she's intellectual, but why wouldn't she be or feel anything, any sexual attraction towards Jude? We understand with Philipson. Makes sense. He's old enough to be her father. But why Jude? Whom at least she claims she loves and she likes. And she even tells him at one point, if I had met you first before you had been married or anything, probably something would have. You would have been my man. Better women would not. People say I must be cold-natured, sexless. And of course, the word she puts here is how critics tend to see her. Somebody who is almost sexless because she does not. And for many critics, what they call the new woman was this woman who, we wouldn't say sexless because they're not, but they were given so much more importance to intellect that the sex became almost subordinate to that, or even very, very marginal. But I won't have it. Some of the most passionately erotic poets have been the most self-contained in their daily lives. Have you told Mr. Phillipson about this university scholar friend? Look at his loss for words. Yes, long ago. I have never made any secret of it to anybody. What did he say? He did not pass any criticism. And I think you will have a section in this, one of the chapters is going to open with a description, a long description of Phillotson. We're not going to read it together, probably not, so I encourage you to read it. But this is an important aspect, difference between the way characters are dealt with in a novel, the form of characterization that we have. We have, of course, what the narrator says about them, and that's what you're going to have in the case of Phillotson, and in the case of Jude most of the time. But you also have, and that's very important, how characters reveal themselves through their conversation, through their ideas, and also through what they believe they are. Okay? So part of the conundrum, part of the ambiguity of Sue comes from what the narrator says about her, or at least refuses to say about her, from what Jude thinks about her, and what she says about herself. He did not pass any criticism. He did not make judgments. He accepted her for what she is. Only said I was everything to him, whatever I did. And things like that. And things like that. She doesn't want to, be in the limelight. He doesn't want to, put herself, praise herself through what he says about her. Jude felt much depressed. He felt much depressed. And with Jude, you have to always imagine him, when he is with Sue, you have to always imagine him doing that. He's confused, he's lost. He's always looking for the right way to interpret her, to understand her. He says he felt depressed. She seemed to get further and further away from him with her strange ways and curious unconsciousness of gender. She does not see herself as female. She seems unconscious of gender, and of course there is a big problem for her. Because remember, when she leaves Phillotson, she says, meet me at the station. And he meets her at the station. She's so scared because she doesn't want to. And instead of going down, he takes her, he says, no, I have booked tickets to another city. We're going to Aldbrickham. We'll see how that is also important, because Aldbrickham is where he goes with Arabella. Remember when his aunt is sick and they have to go and they decide to meet and go visit her, the two of them, Sue and Jude. In the meantime, he meets Arabella. Yeah, and they spend the night. Where do they spend the night together? Because Arabella does not want to see him in Christminster. So no. I mean, she doesn't tell him, but she's probably already married or doesn't want to be associated with him. So she says, we'll go to another place. And they go to Aldbrickham. Huh? To the hotel. To the inn. And they're going to go to the same inn. And they will have the same room even. Okay? The moment they enter the train, he wants to kiss her. He wants to lay his hands on her and he wants to kiss her, because to him, okay, boy meets girl and they live happily ever after. That's what he thinks. And she says, no, please. Not now. She's not ready. He doesn't understand. He says, those are the moments he finds her really very, very cruel. He thinks of it as cruelty, because he does not imagine that she must have a problem with her sexuality as such. Can you move a little bit down? I have no respect for Christminster whatever, except, she says, in a qualified degree on its intellectual side, said Sue Brighthead Ernest. My friend I spoke of took that out of me. So in fact, that young man she lived with not only gave her books and helped her, learn things, but he also is responsible for her skepticism. The skepticism that she has comes from the learning and his own beliefs. We understand that he is an atheist. And that's how she lost her own faith, at least on the superficial level. He was the most irreligious man I ever knew, and the most moral. And this is a new notion. For a traditional society, to differentiate morality from religion is a new thing. Of course, today it's taken for granted. Okay, morality is not necessarily religious, but for the society in which it is, the two go together. And intellect at Christ's ministry is new wine in old bottles. There's nothing new under the sun. They just put them in new bottles, but the contents, what is learned, is the same. The same, meaning that society is not changing. The learning that is imparted to those young people in college does not change life, does not change society, does not change the culture and the mentality. The medievalism of Christ's minister must go, be sloughed off, or Christ's minister itself will have to go. It won't survive if it stays like that. The modern era, this new age for which they are not ready, is already there. But Christ's minister itself does not seem to realize that the world is changing. To be sure, at times we couldn't help having a sneaking liking for the traditions of the old faith, as preserved by a section of the thinkers there in touching and simple sincerity. But when I was in my saddest, rightest mind, I always felt, oh ghastly glories of saints, dead limbs of gibbeted gods. This is the poem I referred to earlier. Yes, hymn to Proserpine. Do I need to write it down? I don't have to. Swinburne. Hymn to Proserpine. Like I said last week, the poem is about how what Proserpine represents, and Proserpine is Persephone, Proserpina. In Roman mythology, in Greek mythology, she is Persephone. Persephone is the goddess of the underworld, who has been kidnapped by Hades. Okay? What the hymn says, the hymn is about how the pagan deities, and the pagan deities are the deities of the gods of the Greeks and the Romans, the tradition she wants to associate with. Okay? How these gods have been replaced by new gods, a new religion, Christianity. And if Sue is quoting from hymn to Proserpine, it means she regrets the impact of Christianity on this civilization, whose origins, whose roots are in the Greek-Roman tradition. That's her pagan side, that's her intellectual side, as opposed to her religious, in a sense, repressed side, which will come up later on. So, you are not a good friend of mine to talk like that. Why does he say that? He has just taken the decision to become a licentiate, to have a career in the church. And now, she's talking against religion, so you're not my friend if you talk like that. Remember when they are together here, he asks her, if you had not been here, now I would kneel and pray. And she says, yeah, you can do it. And she says, don't look. Don't look at me. What kind of person would feel the need, the necessity for prayer, for worship, for religion, and yet who does not want to be seen? As if you want to do it, you believe in it, but at the same time you're ashamed of doing it. You feel in somewhat. Watch. Then I won't the emotional throat note had come back and she turned her face over. I still think Prime Minister has much that is glorious. Though I was resentful because I couldn't get there, he spoke gently and resisted his impulse to pique her on to tears. He doesn't want to make her cry. And look at what she says. And this is really Thomas Hardy speaking through Sue. This is Thomas Hardy's criticism of the present day society, of present day culture. This culture that is made for the elite, that is made for the rich and not for the poor. It is an ignorant place, except as to the townspeople, artisans, drunkards, and paupers. It is an ignorant place except, and who are those who are not ignorant? The manual workers, the hard-working people and the poor. These are the ones who are not ignorant. She is even flipping the world upside down. She's turning the world upside down. The ignorant are the ones who know, are the ones who learn, are the ones who have an education. Those are the ignorant ones. And those who know better are the ones who work hard. The poor, the downtrodden, the marginalized. She said, perverse still at his differing from her. They see life as it is, of course. But few of the people in the colleges do. If the people, these are not ignorant, it's because they see life for what it is. They are the ones who are confronted to the harshness of reality. Why not the others? Because they live in ivory towers. They are the intellectuals. They are the scholars. They are the teachers, the professors. They live in ivory towers. They live in books. They don't know how the common people live. You prove it in your own person. You are one of the very men Christ Minister was intended for. When the colleges were founded, the idea of college, the idea of university is really for that. It's for people like you. It's not for people with money. A man with a passion for learning but no money or opportunities or friends. It's almost like talking about Morocco. Well, you need adva, you know. But you were elbowed off. You were elbowed off. You know, given the shoulder. Elbowed off the pavement by the millionaire's sons. The world has not changed much, huh? Well, I can do without what it confers. I can do without what it confers, what it's going to give me, what it offers me. I care for something higher. And he always puts the bar a little bit higher. I mean, his ideals are endless. After an eye for something broader, truer, she insisted. At present, intellect in Christ Minister is pushing one way and religion the other. At present, in Christ Minister, intellect is pushing one way and religion another. What do we have? We have a tug of war. We have a tug of war. Two sides pulling in different directions, and society is torn between those two movements, those two currents. And that's what you see in the characters, in their struggles, in their fights. The same thing. Intellect, reason requires one thing, but religion really needs something completely different. Complete submission. And so they stand stock still. What is the result? Society is stagnating. It's not moving. They stand stock still like two rams butting each other. And there's a nice picture of two rams, you know, two big rams butting each other. Immediately after that, they go into a discussion about religion. And remember that he's going to tell her, do you have one of those New Testaments? Did you remember that point? a New Testament that is not one of the four basic Gospels accepted by the church? Do you have one of those new ones? Already his ideas are changing. You know that at the time, today, less in theory, in practice is still the same thing. Four Gospels are the Orthodox, the ones accepted by the Catholic Church. John, Luke, Matthew, and what did we say? John, Luke, Matthew. Okay, forgot the other one. Not James. Mark. Thank you. Mark. 4. And he will ask her about a new one of the others. Today we have the Gospel of Mary, the Marys, Mary and Mary Magdalene as well, and we have Bouraraaaa, lots of other Gospels. Why would he be interested in that? Because those Gospels, the apocryphal ones, they we call apocryphal. You know what apocrypha is?
No.
A-P-O-C-H, because this is dead. Okay? A-P-O-C-H-R-Y-P-H-A-L. Apocryphal. Apocrypha refers to a number of books in the Bible whose authority is not established. So they are printed, you find them in the Bible, but they are not used as sources for any religious practice or ritual. Okay? And they are printed, they are there, but they are not considered books that you have to follow. Like, I don't know, something like, imagine a hadith da'ifa in the Muslim tradition. It would be something close to that. Okay? So he will ask for those. When he starts asking for those things, his faith is already being weakening under the impact of the skepticism of Sue. So when they're talking here, he learns from her to question what has been accepted or taken for granted. First sign of that, they talk about religion, and at one point, she says, "But my dear Sue, my very dear Sue," can you find that? Just a little bit down, just a page probably. Yeah. "I'm not against you," he said, taking her hand and surprised her, introducing personal feelings or feeling into mere argument. Becomes emotional when they're discussing ideas. "Yes, you are. Yes, you are," she cried, turning away her face that he might not see her brimming eyes. She's crying. They are discussing religion, and she's questioning the church's interpretation of Scripture. She is challenging, questioning the church's official, explanation, interpretation of Scripture. And she's going to give him an example. A very interesting example. You are on the side of the people in the training school. Remember, from which she is going to be rejected. At least you seem almost to be. Because you may not agree with them, you may not like the way with it, but in fact you seem to see things the same way. What I insist on is that to explain such verses as this, and she gives him a verse from the Song of Solomon. And the Song of Solomon is a famous song, attributed to Solomon, And the Song of Solomon is this song where you have very beautiful expression of love, but which the church has problems seeing as really an expression of love between man and woman. So what do? They read it metaphorically, allegorically, symbolically, rather than literally. So she says, for example, these verses, "Whither is thy beloved gone, O thou fairest among women?" She said, how? By the note, because they have a note to explain, like a gloss. "The church professeth her faith is supremely ridiculous. It is ridiculous for the church to read a verse like that, when it is about a man and a woman, to interpret it as the church is professing her faith. The woman is not woman. It is religion. It is faith. Okay? So this skepticism on her part, this being against the grain, this being against the stream, is what at the same time attracts him and yet intrigues Jude seriously. A couple of paragraphs later, I won't disturb your convictions. I really won't, she went on soothingly. For now, he was rather more ruffled than she. He was more ruffled. I don't know what word we can use. Shaken. Marudatu. He's ruffled. He's not comfortable in what he believes in anymore. But I did want and long to ennoble some man to high aims. She wants to be an inspiration for some man to be, and she in fact becomes for him, at least for a while. And when I saw you, and you wanted to be my comrade, shall I confess it? I thought that man might be you. But you take so much traditional trust that I don't know what to say. You take so much tradition on trust that I don't know what to say. And in fact, his itinerary with her is going to be an itinerary towards disillusionment, towards more skepticism, and then eventually loss of faith. At the end, yes, like I said, he burns his books and he doesn't seem to believe anymore. He believes only in union with her, a union which she rejects because she has, again, completely changed. He looked away, a couple of paragraphs down, for that epicene tenderness of hers was too harrowing. Was it that which had broken the heart of the poor leader writer? And was he to be the next one? And Sue becomes something like la femme fatale. Like this woman who seems, she becomes dangerous for these men. I'm not sure that the femme fatale image is really the right one, because she does not strike you as particularly sexually attractive, okay? But only in the sense of bringing disaster to men and making them lose whatever sense of manhood or virility or integrity they have. But Sue was so dear. If he could only get over the sense of her sex, if he could only get over the sense of her sex, that she's a woman after all, as she seemed to be able to do so easily of his, she is not looking at him as a male, but simply as a comrade. What a comrade she would make. For their difference of opinion on conjectural subjects only drew them closer together on matters of daily human experience. What is keeping them apart is really this sense of his thinking of her as a woman. But other than that, apart from that, if he didn't have those feelings for her, he would be really in very good terms with her intellectually. She was nearer to him than any other woman he had ever met. And remember that he hasn't met many. We only know of Arabella. Maybe he's thinking about his aunt and all the women he knows. Not necessarily in any sexual sense. He had ever met, and he could scarcely believe that time, creed, and absence would ever divide him from her. Time will, creed will, and absence will. That's what he doesn't see. Time will divide him from her in the figure of little Father Time. He's going to kill the children and himself. And creed, religion, because he will be separated from her when she becomes religious at the end. When she decides that a form of self-expiation, of purgation, a form of repentance is necessary for her. They will be separated by that. And of course, she will become absent because he will be in one city, she will be in another. He will be living with Arabella, she will be living with Phyllis. Where do I go from here? I'm going to go long. The end of chapter 6, sorry. There's again a conversation between the two, and at one point she says, "But how can I?" She bursts out. Can you find that? Probably. But how can I? She bursts. Yeah. One. Yeah. 163. 163. But how can I? She burst out. Here I have been saying or writing that you might love me, or something of the sort, just out of charity. And I don't need to remind you of the many times in which she says him, "You can love me, no you can't love me. You can only like me. You can come visit me, no you can't come visit me. You can come on Sunday, no you can't come on Sunday." All of these. I mean, yeah, this is, I mean, really that's what she, that's part of her nervousness, her hesitation, the pressure that she seems to experience without necessarily realizing how.
Thomas Hardy mentions your reasons makes
Sue? Jude.
falling in love
With Sue.
but we don't know what makes her fall in love with
Fall in love with him.
when, how, why.
Yeah. It just happens. Yes, you're right. I mean, I can't disagree with you on that. But I don't know. I mean, it's true because I never thought about her as really in love with him. I thought of her as really needing a companion like that. The need for somebody who can
disagree with her.
not just disagree, who can really agree.
Yes.
Intellectually, they agree.
No,
I
who
mean,
can't? Who can't
Oh,
disagree?
who can't disagree with her? Yeah. In a sense, yes. Probably she's not in love with him, but she tells him she's in love with him. I don't know. I mean, she's a weird character. I can't explain her, but I think we have to keep in mind these two things in her personality. That there is this side, very, very intellectual in her, and that seems to be really the motivation, the driving force. That she seems to act on the basis of that. It doesn't mean that she doesn't have any feelings for him, but the feelings she has cannot be explained in terms of love as we understand it, because if they can be explained in terms of love as we understand it, then why doesn't sex figure in that love? I think what motivates, what explains Sue's behavior is not just the longing for a soulmate, it's also the fear of failure in the relationship. Is it due to what her aunt calls this hereditary element in the family, this curse? Is it simply the rejection? Remember that this is a girl who lived with her father. And the mother had, before she committed suicide or whatever, left the father. And then she lived with somebody who killed himself, or at least died of consumption, and partly she believed he was sick because of her. All of her emotional life around men and around marriage and around the possibility of sexual union has only one outcome: failure. And maybe it is this failure that determines the fear of love. What we have in Sue is really the fear of love rather than the desire for love. Because the intellectual union is there, the desire for a soulmate is there, the comradeship is there, but the love that can be also experienced physically is absent. She kisses him on his head. She gives him a light kiss. It's only in a very special moment, a moment of parting, a strong moment, which will be a turning point. He wants to kiss her, she does not want. They leave, they split. And something like reminds you of all Hollywood movies. No? They're leaving, splitting, and they turn at the same time. And when they turn at the same time, at that moment, they run towards one another, and they hug, and they kiss. Hardy tells us they kiss long, and they kiss hard, for the first time. And that's the kiss, that the only moment in which we really have real passion on the part of Sue. Outside that, there's no real strong passion. That's the kiss that probably he's going to get, and no kiss after that. The mother of all kisses for him. But I don't know whether I answered your question. You're right. I never thought about her as really falling in love with him. No, not really. I don't think... She says it about herself. She's incapable of it. But I think it's probably the fear of love rather than the incapacity as such. Part of her, the determinism she is product of. But how can I? She burst out. Here I have been saying or writing that you might love me, or something of the sort, just out of charity. And all the time, oh, it is perfectly damnable how things are, she said, stamping her foot in a nervous quiver. You are wrong, Sue, he says. I never thought you cared for me at all, till quite lately. And Jude has to spend a lot of time justifying himself with Sue. We'll see later, and in Old Brickham, when she discovers, you remember, in Old Brickham in the hotel room, he goes out, and one of the women working in the hotel tells her he was here a month ago with another woman. I mean, there are nice people around the world. And she tells him that, and when he comes back, he has to justify himself. And she said, you lied to me. And he has to explain, if you're not interested in me, if you're not interested in a life with me, how can I be lying to you? If you don't care, then you don't care. Why would it be lies? And anyway, she was my wife, legally. And she's in fact trapped in a logic, in her own logic, because her logic is not very logical. Yeah, she can't have him, she knows it, but at the same time she blames him for not being the kind of devoted lover at least she has in mind. And he is, really. You take me wrong, Sue. I never thought you cared for me at all, till quite lately. So I felt it did not matter. Do you care for me, Sue? You know how I mean. I don't like out of charity at all. How can you love anybody out of charity? I mean, you love people out of charity, you love humanity out of charity. You don't love another man like that for out of charity. I don't like out of charity at all. Why would she use such a phrase? She's not religious. Why would she love him out of charity? Does he deserve love? Otherwise he's going to die? What kind of statement is that? What words is she looking for that she cannot find? What kinds of emotions is she experiencing that she cannot put into words, into the right words, so that she can say out of charity? Why would you, imagine you going out in the streets and bestowing love out of charity on women or on men. It was a question which in the circumstances Sue did not choose to answer. And she will never answer him that. I mean, he will never really be directly told that she loves him and in the way he loves her. I suppose she, your wife, is a very pretty woman, even if she's wicked. She asked quickly. She's pretty enough as far as that goes. Prettier than I am, no doubt. You are not the least alike. This is a form of female jealousy that she's experiencing. And he has to explain what she means to him. And I have never seen her for years, and she's sure to come back. They always do. They always do. Who are they? Is it wicked women? Why would he use the plural? They always do. The things that make life miserable, the things that make life terrible, the things that make life tragic, they always do. It's almost like he doesn't believe that happiness can be an everlasting thing, a story that he can experience in any real peace. I'm going to kill myself today. How strange of you to stay apart from her like this, said Sue, her trembling lip and lumpy throat belying her irony. You, such a religious man, how will the demigods in your pantheon, his demigods, you know what she means by, whenever she uses the term his demigods, she means the church, the priests, the saints, the prophets, all the figures he believes in, whether they are biblical or in the church itself. How will you, the demigods in your pantheon, because the pantheon is where the gods live. We think of the Greek pantheon, or the Roman pantheon, okay? But of course what she means, the gods of the church, the people who rule over Christians. I mean those legendary persons you call saints, intercede for you after this. You're a sinner, that's what she's telling you. You're a sinner. Now, if I had done such a thing, it would have been different and not remarkable, because I'm a Voltairean, become a skeptic. Not like you, you're a religious man. For I, at least, look at this, don't regard marriage as a sacrament. To me, marriage is not a sacrament. She does not recognize, she does not accept marriage, that marriage is a religious, sacred rite or ritual. Your theories are not so advanced as your practice. You live in contradiction. So, you are terribly cutting when you like to be a perfect Voltaire. But you must treat me as you will. When she saw how wretched he was, she softened. And trying to blink away her sympathetic tears, said with all the winning reproachfulness of a heart-hurt woman, you should have told me before you gave me the idea that you wanted to be allowed to love me. I had no feeling before that moment at the railway station except a moment. You gave me the impression, and that's why I never thought about you. You gave me the wrong impression, and that's why I became attracted to you emotionally. For once, Sue was as miserable as he in her attempts to keep herself free from emotion, and her less than half success. Don't cry, dear, he implored. I'm not crying because I meant to love you. Why the hesitation? Why the hesitation in the words? Why is she always struggling to express things? But because of your want of confidence. She's blaming him. If our story is failing or has failed or is going to, it's because you lack confidence. And she doesn't understand that his lack of confidence is not lack of confidence. Actually, really. It's realistic. Yeah, of course, because he's married. How can he encourage any kind of relationship? Next chapter, one of the many moments of conversation we will have about marriage. Marriage viewed from different perspectives. The first one is going to be, of course we already know that Sue does not consider marriage a sacred institution. At least she does not think it should be. And Sue, or Jude's view of marriage comes from his own personal experience, which is an experience that has also all failed. She writes him and asks him to wish her joy. And immediately after that, in the letter, paragraph 4 or 5, Jude staggered under the news. Now he has received the news that she's got to marry Philip. Could eat no breakfast and kept on drinking tea because his mouth was so dry. Then, presently, she went back to his work. He went back to his work and laughed, the usual bitter laugh of a man so confronted. The laugh on the surface, but the suffering inside, because he's with he's working with other artisans. But deep within, he is suffering. Everything seemed turned into satire. And yet, and of course satire is Thomas Hardy's word for the world is laughing at you. And we will have in many instances nature laughing at them, or something outside, yes, laughing at the character. And yet, what could the poor girl do, he asked himself, and felt worse than shedding tears. Oh, Susanna, Florence, Mary, because that's how she signed her letter, establishing distance, no longer, as if no longer on intimate terms. He said, as he worked, you don't know what marriage means. You don't know what you're putting yourself into. Could it be possible that his announcement of his own marriage had pricked her onto this? And of course, in Hardy, this is how things happen. And this is why I said, in the case of Sue, it's almost never an action. It's always a reaction. She reacts to things rather than acts freely outside any pressure from outside circumstances. Just as his visit to her, when in liquor, may have pricked her on to her engagement. To be sure, there seem to exist these other and sufficient reasons, practical and social, for her decision. Remember that it is the fear for her reputation, and his as well. But Sue was not a very practical or calculating person. At least that's what he thinks. But he doesn't understand that she too is experiencing contradictions and therefore trying to come to terms with them. And the decision she takes about marrying Philipson comes to a large extent from that. But Sue was not a very practical or calculating person, and he was compelled to think that a pique at having his secret sprung upon her had moved her to give way to Philipson's probable representations that the best course to prove how unfounded were the suspicions of the school authorities would be to marry him offhand as in fulfillment of an ordinary engagement. Whether consciously or unconsciously made, but this is not necessarily Thomas Hardy giving us what Sue is thinking, but this is how Jude tries to understand the situation. Maybe the pressure of society, maybe his own mistake because he didn't tell her. Maybe all of these things prompted her to decide to marry Philip. Sue had, in fact, been placed in an awkward corner. Poor Sue. And this is why, in addition to all the things we said, this is a psychological novel. It's not necessarily about how things are, it's about the impact of things on individuals and how they determine whatever thoughts they have, emotions, and of course whatever action they undertake. Jude, will you give me a way to write him in this letter? I have nobody else who could do it so conveniently as you, being the only married relation I have here on the spot, even if my father were friendly enough to be willing, which he isn't. I hope you won't think it a trouble. And she says, I have been looking at the marriage service in the prayer book, and it seems to me very humiliating that a giver away, you know, the father holding the bride and walking through the aisle. And it seems to me very humiliating that a giver away should be required at all. Women should be free to give themselves away, to decide who to marry and when to marry. According to the ceremony, as they are printed in the books, my bridegroom chooses me of his own will and pleasure. The man chooses the bride, but I don't choose him. I am married off to him. Somebody gives me to him, like a she-ass, or a she-goat, or any other domestic animal. Can't find a nicer writer than Hardy. And of course, the giving away is going to be, for both of them, especially the day at the church, it's going to be really an emotional trial for both of them. It's going to be very, very strong, very tough on the two of them. But yeah, at the end of the chapter, I'm making a big effort. I'm moving fast today, at least in some cases. Yes?
Did you send the House of Passages of Manchester in the group? Did you send the House of Passages of Manchester in the group?
Manchester? I did. Maybe just because I have the pages.
Because the last one I wanted to do that was the attachments.
Oh, maybe because I have the pages. I have the pages. I did that work. I went to your copy and I started looking for the... I don't know. Probably not. But I'm going to, by the end of the chapter, and the beginning of the chapter. So near the end of the chapter, you have a paragraph beginning with when they had passed up the church. Yeah. Page?
172.
172. 172. 172. When they had passed up the church and were standing in their places, Jude found that the antecedent visit had certainly taken off the edge of this performance. Because remember, they had been there together, because before marriage she comes and lives there for a few weeks. Okay? And in the meantime, they went through the church and they got acquainted with at least the physical space and what is required of them. But by the time they were halfway on with the service, he wished from his heart that he had not undertaken the business of giving her away. And look at the emotional trial, the emotional repercussions. How could Sue? These are those moments where the narrator, the omniscient narrator, is completely inside the mind of the character. We hear Jude's words. We feel Jude's feelings and emotions. How could Sue have had the temerity? Huh? How could she dare? Yeah, had the guts. How could she have the temerity to ask him to do it? A cruelty possibly to herself as well as to him. Women were different from men in such matters. Was it that they were, instead of more sensitive, as reputed, as culture and society believes? Were they more callous, meaning careless, callous, cruel also, and less romantic? Or were they more heroic? All of this does not tell you anything about Sue, but it tells you everything you need to know about Jude coming to terms with who Sue is. Or was Sue simply so perverse that she willfully gave herself and him pain for the odd and mournful luxury of practicing long-suffering in her own person, and of being touched with tender pity for him at having made him practice it? We could perceive that her face was nervously set, and when they reached the trying ordeal of Jude giving her to Philipson, she could hardly command herself. So he's looking at her. He sees that emotionally she is troubled, extremely troubled. Rather, however, as it seemed, from her knowledge of what her cousin must feel, whom she need not have had there at all, than from self-consideration. He's hoping. Probably that the feeling, the trouble she seems to be going through comes from knowing the fact that she knows that she has put Jude under such pressure. Possibly she would go on inflicting such pain again and again, and grieving for the sufferer again and again, in all her colossal inconsistency. And that's the best description of her. Colossal inconsistency. That's what she is to him. She is, in her inconsistency, she's not regular. A huge inconsistency. Big. Philipson seemed not to notice, to be surrounded by a mist of which prevented his seeing the emotions of others. As soon as they had signed their names and come away and the suspense was over, Jude felt relieved. Thank God it's over. The meal at his lodging was a very simple affair, and at 2 o'clock they went off. In crossing the pavement to the fly that's the car taking the horses, she looked back, and there was a frightened light in her eyes. A frightened light in her eyes. Could it be that Sue had acted with such unusual foolishness as to plunge into she knew not what, for the sake of asserting her independence of him, of retaliating on him for his secrecy? What motivations drive her? What psychological motivation drives her? Perhaps Sue was thus venturesome with men because she was childishly ignorant of that side of their natures which wore out women's hearts and lives. Their sexuality. She doesn't know how men's sexuality determines their relations to women. When her foot was on the carriage step, she turned round, saying that she had forgotten something. Jude and the landlady offered to get it. No, she said, running back. It is my handkerchief. I know where I left it. And he's going to give us a hint. He will close the paragraph on that very sad note of maybe she is simply going away for a while because she wants to cry freely. Jude followed her back. She had found it and came holding it in her hand. She looked into his eyes with her own tearful ones, and her lips suddenly parted as if she were going to avow something. But she went on, and whatever she had meant to say remained unspoken. Whatever she had meant to say remained unspoken between the two of them. Excuse me. Next chapter, said that setting in the novel is of course important on the literal level because you need space and time. Yes. But there are also places are also metaphorical and symbolic. And I told you that Hardy uses a lot this idea that the world is against the individual. I told you that at one point nature seems to scorn, or at least express a form of scorn, what you called satire earlier, okay, at what is happening to individuals. Individuals may suffer. Like I told you about that beautiful beginning in Tolstoy's Anna Karenina. People can be happy together, but they suffer on their own. People can be happy together, they can celebrate together, but when in tragedy they are alone. And this is what we're going to have. The paragraph opened with, having indulged in this wild hope, he went upstairs. Found it?
Yes.
Same, so beginning of the chapter. Anne looked out of the window and pictured her through the evening journey to London, whither she and Philipson had gone for their holiday, their honeymoon. There, rattling along through the damp night to their hotel, under the same sky of ripped cloud as that he beheld, through which the moon showed its position rather than its shape, and one or two of the larger stars made themselves visible as faint nebulae only. It was a new beginning of Sue's history. He projected his mind into the future and saw her with children more or less in her own likeness around her. Again, his idealization. It's going to be very hard for him to imagine that the children will look like Philipson. He wants them to look like her, imagining children. Of course, only someone in love can feel that way. But the consolation of regarding them as a continuation of her identity was denied to him, as to all such dreamers like him, lovers, by the willfulness of nature, with a capital N, in not allowing issue from one parent alone. It takes two to tango. Every desired renewal of an existence is debased by being half alloy. Debased. Nothing is pure. If the estrangement of death or death of my lost love, I could and see her child, hers solely, there would be comfort in it. I would be comforted if she can have children, but they would be her children alone, not shared by anybody, which is an impossibility. It's as if nature itself is against him. Biology tells him no, if she has children, they're going to be from somebody else, too, not just from her. Said Jude. And then he again uneasily saw, as he had latterly seen with more and more frequency, the scorn of nature for man's finer emotions and her lack of interest in his aspirations. Nature does not care. That's what he's saying. Nature does not care. As an NLP, I was thinking of it in French, neuro-linguistic programming guru says, teaching people to keep quiet and to keep their nerves in moments of, they want to be no-limit people, as he says. If you're in the traffic, like in a city like Casablanca, of course he's saying Chicago, which is completely different. You can imagine 10 times Casablanca. And you see, you look ahead and, wow, too many cars. And some people get mad and they start, blowing their horns and some scream. He said, the traffic doesn't care. The traffic doesn't, it's indifferent to how angry you can be, emotionally worked up you can be. And this is exactly how Jude feels at this stage. I'm going to just the next book, the next chapter, if you don't mind. Part. Or, sorry, chapter 10. I forgot. Jude returned to Melchester, which had the questionable recommendation of being only 12.5 miles from Jesus' now permanent residence. We will be told, dangerously close. He is dangerously close to where Sue is living. At first, he felt that this nearness was a distinct reason for not going southward at all. But Christ's ministry was too sad a place to bear, while the proximity of Shaston to Melchester might afford him the glory of worsting the enemy in a close engagement. Again, another allusion. Worsting the enemy is the devil. He is still a man intent on his religious career. Worsting the devil meaning I will resist temptation. I will be that close, and yet I will be stronger than the devil, than the temptation to see her, to go to her. Such as was deliberately sought by the priests and virgins of the early church. That's his model now. I want to be like the priests and the virgins of the early church. Again, how much does he know about that? He knows through what? Remember, she told him about the demigods, the saints. How do you know about the saints? You know about the saints if you're a religious person from hagiography. The lives of saints. The biographies of the saints. And you know how in Christianity people become saints? It's long after they die, they are canonized. People start talking about Bouraraaaa, all the things they were able to achieve, and they turn into mythical or mythological figures. And decades later, sometimes centuries later, people start really treating them as almost angelic figures. And they canonize them and they become saints. In other words, hagiography is not life as it is. It's really life as an ideal. And for the saint, or for somebody like Jude, the life of the saint is life as it should be lived by a good Christian. Okay? So that's how he knows that. So he says, I want to be like those early priests, like those early nuns who were virgins, and they lived in complete devotion and dedication to God, to their religion. As such as was deliberately sought by the priests and virgins of the early church, who, disdaining an ignominious flight from temptation, became even chamber partners in impunity. Those who could not resist. By living together, and remember this is an interesting parallel, because he's talking about the saints that at least he believes in, as opposed to virgins, nuns, and priests who lived together but yielded to the temptation. They had sexual intercourse. They lived together in impunity, without being punished, because nobody knew about that. The same thing, the same way, or this is why the parallel is intriguing, because Sue lived with that young man without letting him touch her, without sleeping with him. Became chamber partners with impunity. Jude did not pause to remember that in the laconic words of the historian, insulted nature sometimes vindicated her rights in such circumstances. You can deny nature. You can deny your sexuality, but it will manifest itself. It will impose itself on you regardless. You can't deny it. Insulted nature, insulted because it is denied. Nature, sometimes vindicated, justified, imposed her rights. He now ventured with feverish desperation to his study for the priesthood, in the recognition that the single-mindedness of his aims. Look, the devotion to studies becomes again a refuge from this rejection, from this being away from Su. The recognition that the single-mindedness of his aims and his fidelity to the cause had been more than questionable of late. He has come to doubt his own religiosity. His passion for Su troubled his soul. Yet his lawful abandonment to the society of Arabella for 12 hours seemed instinctively a worse thing. They had now spent the night together at Aldbrickham. And now, even though she is his wife, on paper, he feels guilty. Even though she had not told him of her Sydney husband till afterwards. He verily believed, overcome all tendency to fly to liquor, alcohol, strong drinks, which indeed he had never done from taste, but merely as an escape of intolerable misery of mind. When he was rejected, when the undergraduates teased him, yet he perceived with despondency that taken all round, he was a man of too many passions to make a good clergyman. He was a man of too many passions to make a good clergyman. The utmost he could hope for was that in a life of constant internal warfare between flesh and spirit, the former might not always be victorious. What is he doing? This is a new resolution. He knows he is torn, he knows he is pulled towards his attraction for Su, and he wants a religious career, and he knows that he yields easily to temptation, whether through drink or through Arabella, and he comes to the conclusion it's because of that, because of all these negative traits in him, that he becomes a good subject for a religious career. Which means that my life is going to be a constant fight against temptation, and in that sense it will be much more significant for me as a religious person. After that, one of the recourses, one of his, the things he resorts to, is he takes up music. He becomes interested in music. And he hears that beautiful composition, The Foot of the Cross. And you know, the foot of the cross is, this is again another time in which he unconsciously compares himself to Jesus. Because the fact that he likes this composition, and the composition is entitled The Foot of the Cross, means the foot of the, you know what happened at the foot of the cross? It's when Jesus was crucified that Mary, his mother, and Mary Magdalene came to the foot of the cross. Okay? And Mary is going to wash his feet, Mary Magdalene. She washed his feet before he was crucified. And she comes and they kneel at his feet and they start praying before the body is taken down. And it's going to be taken down by 2 Roman soldiers. Okay? So the moment is a moment of self-sacrifice, but at the same time a moment of complete devotion to God in the figure of Jesus. By whom? Mary Magdalene. And Mary Magdalene is the sinner. You know who Mary Magdalene is? The story of Mary Magdalene is a very controversial story. In the major, the four Gospels, John, Mark, Luke, and Matthew. When Mary Magdalene is mentioned, her story is that she is the one who washes his feet with a special kind of ointment. Think of a special kind of cream that you buy that's very expensive. And his story with Mary Magdalene is when he is praying, when he is doing his missionary work, at one point in one of the villages, he witnesses a prostitute being dragged in the middle of the square, in the middle of the village, and she's going to be stoned to death. That's what the story, that's what the official biblical story says. That because she's a prostitute, she has committed adultery, she's a prostitute. There's a big problem here in the naming. But she is both. She is a prostitute and therefore she is fornicating outside wedlock. She is brought to the middle of a square and the men are there and they're going to start stoning her to death because in accordance, it is said, in accordance to the Mosaic law, to the law of Moses, to the Torah. Jesus comes at that point, at that moment, he arrives. And he sees that, he comes and he protects the woman. He says, before you throw, and now you're going to recognize the story. And he says this famous statement, let him, or he who has never sinned, let him throw the first stone. You know the story, I'm sure that you know it. Celui qui n'a jamais péché, qu'il jette la première pierre. And of course what's going to happen is, nobody's going to do it. Yeah. I mean, in reality, I doubt this can happen. But the story, the official story says it happened. All the men who wanted to stone her to death, felt that there was something in what he said. And they didn't kill her. And she becomes a follower. After that, she becomes a disciple of Jesus. She becomes a disciple, and then she will become even a controversial disciple. And today, if you want to know a little bit about how controversial she has become as a figure, read, that's not great literature, but it's, fiction that you read nice and easy reading, and you will. And there's a movie, by the way, on that. The Da Vinci Code. Dan Brown wrote a novel called The Da Vinci Code, the Code Da Vinci, those who read French. And there was a movie made out of that with Tom Hanks, of course, as Robert Langdon, and the French actress, I don't remember her name. But anyways, and you will understand the story of Mary Magdalene and the Gospels. So this is the woman who is kneeling at the foot of the cross. In other words, unconsciously, the figure of Jesus is the figure of self-sacrifice. But it is also the figure that is crucified by society, by the authorities. And in many ways, unconsciously, Jude is thinking that like Jesus, he has sacrificed everything for his learning, for his spiritual quest. But also like Jesus, he is misunderstood and therefore he is sacrificed. And like Mary Magdalene, he is in a process of self-redemption, of purification, of repentance. And that's what he says. It's because I am like that. It's because I am tempted. That's the right thing for me. My life is going to be a daily struggle against the temptation to be close to her. He hears that piece of music. He loves the piece. In the same vein, very like Jude, he tries to get in touch with the composer. He idealizes the composer. This man who has been able to put such spiritual truth in music, he must be very spiritual. So he idealizes the man and he goes to see him, pays him a visit, and he enters, he's led in. I'm not going to go into the details, but he will be stricken by, he will be disappointed, completely disappointed, because the man, seeing Jude, and Jude gives him the impression that, probably not particularly rich, but he does not look like somebody who cannot afford. I mean, his aspect is encouraging. And the man thinks he has come to buy his music. To buy his music, to publish it. And therefore, Jude, while is speaking about the spiritual implications of the piece, and the man is expecting money for the piece, and he says his whole talk is about money, is about not having been able to make any good money out of his music, in spite of the fact that it has been, people sing it, they play it in churches, they play it in things, but he hasn't made any money out of it. So much so, he says, that the best thing for him is to give up music, and he's going to give up music, and launch in trade. He's going to engage in a form of trade because he says that's the place to be. If you want to make money today, it's not music. It's in trade. And this is a huge, a big disappointment for Jude, because he thought that the man had composed the music out of a sense of religiosity, out of a sense of spirituality, not because he wanted money from that. And again, it's a sign of the problem in Jude's perception of things, that he confuses the spiritual and the material, that he confuses the idea with the thing, the representation with the actual reality of the thing. And therefore his disappointment is really great, especially that it is a piece that Sue herself likes. He will realize later when they meet that she liked the piece too, and when she hears that he wants to visit the man, she says, wow, just the thing I would have done. You're so like me. And of course, his disappointment is really, wanted to say something.
Yeah, she went to the scene, I think.
Well, no, she just said, I would have done the same thing. But she doesn't go visit the man. Okay. Part 4. I'm there. Or almost. A chapter. And interestingly, a chapter opens, because it's the section about divorce, it opens with Milton, a quotation from Milton, and those who were with me in the Major Trans course remember Milton's views of divorce. And that's why you have it there. Whoso, and this is Hardy, he puts it at the beginning of part 4, it means it is important. Whoso prefers either matrimony or other ordinance before the good of man and the plain exigence of charity, let him profess Papist or Protestant or what he will. He is no better than a Pharisee. Anyone who prefers the law, remember the scrap of paper? The law as it is, the letter. Remember the novel is about the letter killeth. The letter, not the spirit of the letter. Anyone who prefers the law as a written obligation before, meaning he prefers it to. In modern English we say prefer to. Okay? To what? To the good of man. There are two things. There is the law, the written law, and there is the welfare of humanity. Milton is saying the welfare of humanity is more important than the law. If the law is there and people are not happy, the law is useless. Let him profess, he says. Anyone who prefers the law to the good of humanity, no matter what religion he has. He can be a papist, he can be a Protestant, he can be anything he wants to be. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. He is no better than a Pharisee. And the Pharisees in the Bible, in the New Testament, Jesus, as part of his debates with the rabbis, the figures of authority in the Jewish community. He debated with the Pharisees. And the Pharisees have become, if you hear somebody saying he's a Pharisee, they have become the symbol, the emblem, the embodiment of fixed, stubborn opinions that do not change. Just because they are opinions that have been received and never questioned. Okay? No matter what religion he professes, he is a Pharisee. Meaning he is self-opinionated without strong foundation for what the law, what the spirit of the law means. He is literal in his interpretation of the law. He is not in the spirit of the law. And that's exactly what Milton is saying. Milton is saying exactly, said it in the 17th and in the 18th century, what Hardy is still struggling for, that when marriage becomes an impossibility, when it becomes a source of misery for the partners, it is better. Divorce is a better
necessity.
Yes, that's a possibility. I told you that places, and I'll finish with this. I'll finish with our section. Yeah, my God. Don't even need to start. As you read the beginning. Next week, we'll be in room 13, downstairs. Okay, room 13, downstairs. As you read, look at the beginning. Look at Shasta and how it is described. What kind of city it is? How does he describe it? What kinds of people live in it? And does that explain, or at least explain, justify, go together with the fact that it is at this stage, in this place, that Jude is going to burn his books and completely quit his religious career? The way the place is described as a place of loose morals, corruption. I mean corruption in the religious sense, not necessarily. Okay? Yes? Yeah.
He has designated many titles.
He has two titles.
What is the title of Jude?
I don't know. I mean, people do not have a really a good explanation. He simply says, well, I mean, we will probably try to read that. I told you near the end. We'll ask that question. What does he mean by Jude the obscure? Is it simply because, to give you ways to think about it, is it simply because Jude is obscure? He is a nobody. He's somebody from Mary Green. He's a poor young man, not part of the elite, and therefore he's obscure in that sense. Or is it Jude the obscure because he's the modern man, and as the modern man, he's very hard to understand. He's obscure because of the many forces that seem to tear him apart. He seems to be torn between all of those forces. Is that what makes him obscure? We will see. We will see. I mean, we will not be able to decide on one or the other, but I think it's just what Hardy said about the title is that it seemed more fitting to him as a title. It's the better title for him, at least. Yes. Then and be a fool, yes, exactly. It is an echo of that, but the framework, the intellectual framework is a bit different, but there's no difference because Milton, neoclassical, it's just that one is later than the other. Yeah.
And also,
yes.
I think that the late of 19th century is the century of absurdism.
Yes.
So the age.
Well, I don't know whether it's really the century of the absurdism, but it is definitely of enlightenment, of reason. The absurd will only will thrive really in the second half of the 20th century.
20th?
Yeah. I mean, absurdism as such, it is the 50s and beyond. It's a logical gap of modernity, of modernism,
But we can
and of the Second World War, especially, yes.
But so we can consider it as the beginning, as the...
It's not, yeah, of course. It's not that it's not there. It's just that the idea the concept of the absurd is different completely. Because it's going to change with the existentialists. The concept of the absurd that you're using is a concept we find with Sartre, we find with Albert Camus, and we find with Beckett, Samuel Beckett. I mean, it's not, that's the concept you have in mind, I guess. So you cannot impose it on Milton. It's time for you to leave, guys. It's okay. You can go. Well, yeah, we have one. We got the